Chinko up to the stage. And I want to just provide some context to the discussion around panel 8. So they'll be talking about climate change, and in many mining regions, we're undergoing transitions, whether it's away from mining specializations or from the mining of one material to another. In this process, mining regions face opportunities and challenges in ensuring these transitions positively impact regional development. If we could have Tamara up to the stage. She works at the University of Victoria, and she will be moderating this session, and she's providing some extra support to the OECD in terms of helping write and help support the creation of the case study. So Tamara, it's been an honor to meet you, and I'm so glad that you're part of this important conference, because your voice, along with others here, is going to shape that really important resource coming out of from this process. So miigwech, and come to the stage, please.
Thank you so much. We have a great set of panelists. We also have many panelists, 5. So they will be presenting in a moment. I'll introduce them. As a brief note of introduction, I just want to say it's been such a pleasure to meet so many of you. I think we've had fantastic conversations. It's been wonderful to learn about Atika Meksheng territory and development ambitions and the other nations and leadership that are here. Nadendawin, respect to you all. It's been wonderful to hear from industry leaders and from governments, and to hear the things we want to hear about sustainability, about recognition of Indigenous rights and a new way of working. That's been really promising. And this is a panel about transitions. We've always had transitions, especially in Canada. The dress I'm wearing was made in New Brunswick. We used to have a manufacturing industry in New Brunswick. We don't anymore. But the transitions we're talking about today, they're very different. They're big. They're risky. The stakes are high. We need to do them well. And we have speakers from different countries who are managing different types of transitions. It's very different to transition in a sense that you're adopting a new type of emerging industry, new type of mining. It's very different when you're transitioning from an existing industry, say coal, where in 92% of cases globally, there's no other mining alternative. And in some of those economies, they simply will no longer exist. Economic diversification is not a possibility. So I study transitions globally, and what we tend to see is that they tend to be managed reactively instead of proactively. We have seen tripartite forums, labor, industry, and government come together. Increasingly community. In most cases, Indigenous peoples have not been well involved in these transition management processes. So we're going to hear from some of our speakers today. Without further ado, allow me to introduce them. Welcome to Paul Baker. Where are you, Paul? You're coming up. Great. He is the senior advisor at economies, which is a large, well-known consulting company in Europe. He's also the co-lead of Coal Regions in Transition Initiatives, which is a technical assistance program in the European Union, one I follow closely. I'm really interested in your work. Welcome Craig Wilson, who joins us and is co-founder and managing director of Delta Pearl Partnerships, with decades of experience in over 30 countries. Welcome Doug Morrison. Hi, Doug. President and CEO of CIMI, the Center for Excellence in Mining Innovation, with decades of experience in lots of interesting things, including deep underground metal mines. Welcome Lee Reddle. Do we have Lee? Hi, Lee. Who is the Director of Development Services in the city of Karatha and a town planner by trade. And finally, welcome Grace Blanchard. Thank you for joining us. She is the Senior Program Manager for Resilient Economies and Communities for the National Association of Counties in the US, and is also part of this super interesting network of communities in coal transition. So thank you, panelists. We'll now start with the first presenter, which I believe is Paul.
Hello, everybody. The afternoon session. Everybody's Had a nice lunch, I hope, and ready to snooze. Um, First of all, I want to start by a big thank you to the OECD for inviting me here, also to the City of Sudbury, to all the sponsors. I had a great gala dinner last night, um, and find it slightly strange from a European perspective because there's been such a focus here on Indigenous rights, and it's not really an issue that comes up very often in a European context. We did have a presentation yesterday about the Sami in Finland and Sweden. But it is something that, although my work is focused on the context, the European context, increasingly people are coming to us and saying, well, is there something we can take from your experience to a wider world? And so it's been really interesting for me to hear all the discussion around Indigenous rights, because it's something that I think we will need to take forward if we do the work that we're doing now in a wider international context. I want to just, let's start with this picture. This is a picture of the mining museum in Silesia, in Katowice. And it's a good point for me to start because in 2018, we had the COP in Silesia. And two things came out of that which are kind of relevant for the work we do. The first was the Ministerial Declaration on Solidarity and Just Transition, which really put the notion that workers and communities should be at the heart of transition. The second thing that came out of that was also a recognition of forests for climate, a ministerial declaration on forests for climate. Not something that is really that relevant in most of the work I do, but came out of a Polish initiative and is clearly in the context of where we are today, something of great importance. Can I get a glass of water? Because my voice is, otherwise I'm not going to. Cheers, thanks very much. Where do I point this? Great, okay. Slight delay. So the Coal Regions in Transition Initiative, let me just give some context. In 2017, following the Paris Agreement, following the Europeans' commitment to carbon neutrality and the inevitability of the phasing out of coal, the European Commission recognized that there was no forum for regions and local communities to come together and discuss the issues around transition. And they recognized that these regions face a lot of challenges and that it would be very useful to have a forum where they could come together. I will also be honest, a little bit of this was because the voice of the regions was not being heard at a European level because it was passing via national governments, and some of those national governments were not as supportive as the European Union as a whole to the whole issue of transition. So this is an open forum. It's always been set up as an open forum. It's not just policymakers and business, or even policymakers, business and trade unions, but it's also open to NGOs. It's also open to academia. In fact, it's open to anybody who is interested by the issue of transition. And that's always been part and parcel of this initiative, that it should bring together different voices and that they should have an opportunity to discuss, to exchange, and to collaborate. What underlies this, and I think I've already indicated, is they want to have, at least as far as possible, to facilitate a bottom-up approach to transition. We have a global agreement, we have European policy, we have member states, but below that, the people who are really impacted are at the regional and local level. So it's always been the notion that that voice should be part of the discussion. What do? Well, we host a lot of meetings like this. We bring people together. Usually in the past, we had 3 or 4 meetings a year. We also have something called the annual political dialogue, which was also to try and bring in senior policymakers into part of the discussion. The first one I went to was in Görlitz, and that was in 2020. It was pre-COVID, and if you feel like you're sleeping and you should have sat there. It was a very sad-looking crowd of people that we were talking to. This summer, in July, we had a meeting. It was in Velenje, which is in Slovenia. It was a fantastic meeting. We also had a super dinner and everything like that. But the atmosphere has really changed. And I think the fact that after 5, 6, 7 years now of operating this platform, that people really feel that they are working together. This is not individual regions addressing their problem, but there is a collective problem that needs to be addressed. It also helps that there is, when we started, there was no money on the table. There was no European funding for transition. In the meantime, roughly 50 billion euros worth of money has been dedicated to supporting the transition in the regions. I was listening to some of the figures that were being quoted yesterday of billions and billions of money, that was going to this, that, and the other. So I thought, okay, we are dealing with the tail end of transition, or the tail end of mining, not the tail end of transition. But it's really made a difference. Okay, other things we do just quickly. We do lots of knowledge resources. We share information. We produce information for people. There is a technical assistance program. Well, in fact, there's two. I will talk about mine in a minute because that's START. And there's also, we deal mostly with the kind of economic diversification and social aspects of transition. There's another one that deals with the energy aspects of transition. I'm an economist by way. And then we have exchange programs. And one of the things we think, again, is really important is to allow bilateral or trilateral exchanges between coal regions so that they can come together if they have a shared problem, a shared issue, to try to look to solutions together. So we do that. And that's gone beyond Europe. We also do that now. There was an exchange program with the Western Balkans and with Ukraine before the war started, where we were bringing in people from regions outside of Europe and allowing them to exchange with European regions. It's an initiative that I hope will be relaunched. At the moment, we're still waiting to see what will happen with that. And then the final aspect that we have is international cooperation, which is why I'm able to come here, because somebody pays for me to participate here. But to take it more seriously, it's a really important part of what we're doing now, because I think the experience that we have in Europe is useful for other regions. But it's also that we have an awful lot to learn at the same time. One of the things that we've been doing recently is just to facilitate an exchange dialogue between the States, Australia, and Europe on the issue of coal transition. And I like it, in fact, even at a very local level, I have a group of people, and I'll talk about it later, from Eastern Wielkopolska, which is a coal region in Poland, who are doing something on social economy, and they're talking to people in Appalachia because they want to share experiences on the same model. So the international dimension of what we're doing is also becoming more important. It took me ages to try to get this map together, and it's nowhere near as good as the maps we saw earlier on today. So whatever, and I added last minute the list of all of the regions that we've worked with. So anyway, point one on this map is just to show you that if you look at the kind of orange and dark red, the orange and dark red are the coal regions throughout Europe. So there's a big swathe all the way through Central Europe down through the east of Europe. The UK is no longer part of the EU, so it disappears off the map. We have a bit also in Spain. We also, because it's not just about coal, we also deal with peat. So that covers in central Ireland, there is industrial use of peat, which was used for power generation. We also have, but we don't actually really work with Finland and Sweden. And then up in Estonia, there's oil shale. I've listed the regions that I've worked with, and that my START program has worked with. So we've worked with 14 regions across Europe over the past 5 years. So that's 10 countries. So I've had quite a bit of visiting different coal regions throughout Europe. Very contrasting situations. We have from, I can take Asturias, which has coal mining, but it's a heavily industrialized region. I can take central Poland, again, heavy industry and coal mining. I can take other regions where basically the only industry that we have to deal with is coal. There's nothing else. It's mono-industrial. And that applies, for example, some of the regions in Greece that we're working with. Ireland, for example, okay, it's not coal, it's peat, but it's a rural area and there is nothing else there. What do we do? So the START Technical Assistance Facility, which I jointly run with a great colleague of mine who's a Scotsman, and we have a team of, 30, 40 people. We provide ad hoc technical assistance. But basically what we provide is advice and capacity building at the local level. We will work with public administrations. We also work with trade unions. And we also work with NGOs. And I have to give a big shout out to the NGOs, because for much of the work we've done, they've really been facilitators, because they have enabled us to reach out beyond the public administrations to a much wider community. Also, I have to say that we worked during COVID and we weren't able to travel. And so some of the work that we've done has been supported by people who've been very active at the local level and have really, from the NGO and civil society community, have really been an important part of our whole initiative. What do we do? Typically, we work for over a 6 to a 12-month period, and we try as much as possible to be a kind of more or less hands-on. That doesn't mean that we're in the location all the time, but we're always communicating with our partners. It's really ad hoc and it's really on demand. It's led by them. We have a pretty broad agenda of what we can support in terms of capacity building and advice. So it can be from strategy development, project identification, governance, or it can be specific thematic issues that come up. We're not picky. We'll try and deal with everything that comes along. We try as much as possible to make sure that we are coordinated with other technical assistance instruments. When we started, there was basically only ourselves was the only dedicated technical assistance program for coal regions. Now there are several others that are also focused either on coal regions or on coal regions and carbon intensive regions. Okay, quick photograph again. Had never heard of the super stack, but now I know all about the super stack. So this is Europe's super stack. This is I cannot pronounce the name of the place, but anyway, it's a power station in the central Sava Valley, and same story. The pollution from the power station was spreading over the bottom of the valley, so they thought they would build a bigger tower. They built a bigger tower. All they managed to do was to spread the pollution all over the place, and all those people who'd moved up the side of the valley ended up having pollution in their backyard rather than being above the pollution level. We were asked, what are the key challenges? There are all sorts of challenges, and it's quite difficult to narrow it down. I try to pick out several that I think are relevant, but I think you can discuss this ad infinitum. But at the end, it's good to think, what are we trying to achieve? I mean, and I think Daniel said yesterday, I mean, at the end, we want the best outcomes for our communities. And so really the issue is, okay, how do we get to the best outcomes for our communities? Challenges that have been, particularly at a European level, the first one is just the whole policy environment. It has changed a lot. When we started off, many countries had not given a phase-out date for coal use in power generation, in electricity generation. Now, the only country that has not got a firm commitment to phasing out coal is Poland. But they have to by 2050, at least for power generation. Otherwise, they are not going to meet their obligations under the Paris Agreement. But every time something comes along, we've had COVID, we've had the war in Ukraine, we've had the energy crisis. It always creates a debate about whether the timeline for phasing out of coal is realistic. The reality is, at the moment, nobody has changed their timelines, but there are a few gray areas of people we have to see what happens. And there is some countries that politically are not happy with the idea that they cannot take gas from Russia. And so that influences the whole discussion around the energy system. What we face also in many of the countries, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, is, and somebody mentioned it, transition is not new. It's been going on, particularly since the 1990s. We had a lot of change in the industrial structures, companies that went bust. In Poland, you can talk about the number of mine sites, but just talk about the number of industrial sites that there are there that need to be looked at. And that's had an impact on many of the communities. That long-term decline in industry has meant people have moved away. Thousands of jobs have gone, and we have aging populations, and retaining young people is really an issue in many of these communities. Length of transition timelines, we're trying to reconcile an immediate problem, closing the coal mine, with a longer term problem, which is trying to find a solution for 20, 30, 40 years hence. And it's not easy to reconcile those. Transition governance at a local level, that's also a big issue for us. And we've had a lot of discussion around the whole issue of governance over the course of the past few days here. There's been an effort to try and strengthen the strategic planning at a local level, but often the capacity is not there, and it takes a lot of effort to get to a plan that is acceptable. One thing that was also mentioned is leadership, and it's the same for us. We only sort of initiate things, but we don't. Sorry. So I'll try and, okay, I'm taking too long. And anyway, so the length of the transition timelines is an issue. And then finance is always an issue, because we have to deal with the polluter pays issue, who's responsible. But also now the issue for many of the communities is actually that there is money on the table, they just don't know how to spend it. So, and there is no, but it's a serious problem. There is a timeline. There is a Just Transition Fund. These monies have to be used in the next 3 years. Well, and so actually trying to create the projects, go through the whole administrative process of getting those projects approved and getting the money coming through is really, really difficult to organize at a local level. Okay, I will just give a few highlights. Is that okay? Or do you want me to? Okay. Neat photograph. This is from the Dew Valley. I love this because they have a problem of they're trying to get the youth involved, and one of the first very simple things they did was paint a whole series of murals, and just to create a positive atmosphere in the region. The Dew Valley is really interesting simply because you had 7 municipalities who were not working together. So the first piece of work we did with them was really about getting people together to create a partnership and getting them to think about strategic projects that were not at a municipal level, but were at the level of the territory as a whole. They now have set up an association. That association is functioning, beginning now to have projects coming on stream. If you ever want to go somewhere interesting and talk about the process of transition, it's a really interesting place to go, and super people to work with. Ireland, very quickly, there we had a similar issue. We have very rural communities. Again, they needed to create a plan. We worked on the plan, but one of the key things that they do is we have to address the issue that our local population, local youth, do not have access to higher education. So what they've done is there is now a technological technological university of the Shannon. And the idea is that the university will embed people in the local communities. So it's bringing research and innovation into the communities. It's providing education, but it's also providing monitoring of the whole just transition process. The last example I wanted to give was in Eastern Wielkopolska. There, it's a big lignite mine. The lignite mine is closing. It was recognized that the working population in the mine is relatively old. They do not really want reskilling, and they're not thinking about, what can we do? They're looking at end of career opportunities. So there's a focus there on creating social enterprises, which can then take the workers and provide services to the local community, so that keeps it creates jobs, it keeps those jobs within the community, the people do not have to move, and it's working now on looking at trying to take over issues on maintenance for local businesses. I think that, okay, I have another slide, but I think that'll do for now.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Craig Wilson, and I'm from Delta Pearl Partners, and we're an economics and public policy firm. I'm from Australia, from Brisbane. About 2/3 of our work is in Australia and about 1/3 overseas, mostly with governments or with private sector organisations working with governments, and about a third of our work is with local governments, local organisations, so regional economics, which I love, and about 10 or 15% of our work is with the mining sector. So I'm having a great time. I hope you are too. The crowd's thinned out a little bit, but not too much. Thank you for hanging about. I'm going to try and make this interesting. Got a great lineup here. So the topic is resilient mining economies and transition pathways. Hands up who thinks that's easy. It's just so not easy. And basically no one's done it. Like, there's a lot of people that talk about it, but no one, who's actually made an economy resilient? Oh, okay, righto. All right, well, listen, we're in a tough crowd. So, and it gets started. I'm going to talk about these topics, and then if I get through them quickly, I'm going to add a 10th, but time's important, I get that. So, transition pathways. I'm going to talk about a place. This is a true story. I didn't make this up. It's called Banana. Structural adjustment, a local government engagement model, etc. But all of that's, focused on the topic of resilient economies, etc. So, Australia, and I'm from Australia and from Brisbane, and we were contacted by the local government of a place called the Banana Shire Council, and I'd never heard of it. So the capital town in Banana is called Biloela. So I'd heard of Biloela. Great, I'll go to Biloela. So my colleague, my researcher and I, we went up there, but I thought, where the heck does the name banana come from? So about 130 years ago, when the settlers arrived and they had some cows, there was a yellow cow, and it was there for about 15 years. And so one day, the original councillors got together and they said, well, we need to come up with a name for our town. And they called it after the cow. So the cow was called Banana, and they called the entire shire Banana. I thought that showed a lack of imagination. Anyway, so what we did, the banana people, they said, so the banana economy is 15,000 people, very strong economy, and I really like it. It's very balanced. I've looked at lots of little economies around the world. It's got just a nice mix of some tourism and some heavy engineering and agriculture and services. And so if one thing goes down, or it's going to be okay. They've got transmission lines. They've got coal-fired power stations. And the economy's pumping. Like, it's hard to get a coffee. The barista is working, all of those sorts of things. So, and the task that they set us was, they're sort of an old economy, but they're a very innovative, efficient place, but they're an old economy. And they want to transition to a new economy. They've vaguely got an idea what that is, but they will say critical minerals and they will talk about renewable energy. So we came up with a framework for them. And one of the cool things they did for the practitioners in the room is they set up something called a private sector working group which is they got, I think there was 8 or 9 of them, sort of the CEOs of the big outfits in town, who all bought into it. And so small local council, 15,000 people, James will tell you, you're resource constrained, but there's no shortage of ideas. So basically worked up a big framework, but they don't want to do all the heavy lifting. So with the private sector working group buying in, the idea is them and others will do things. So, here we are. Right. So I thought one of the clever things they did is they're not in a hole, like the economy's going really well. That's a great time to have this conversation. So point number one. The second thing is transition. So that sort of implies you're going from A to B. A is pretty easy to work out. B, you've got to sort of think about it and then, you assume that it's a good idea. So they're transitioning to the clean economic future, which they've got a vague idea about. But the reason they got onto this, like if you stand, like I've done some work in Afghanistan, a bit of a scary place, but Friday night in Billawheeler is even scarier. So if you stand at the pub on a Friday night long enough, someone will sell you a wind farm. So we added up, and they're busy doing their day jobs, but people are knocking on their door saying solar farm, wind farm, battery storage, pumped hydro, hydroelectric. And I think, holy cow, we better get some help in. Holy cow, boom, boom, sorry about that. To work on this. But it's just overwhelming. So we added up over about 8 or 9 years, $16 billion of varying degrees of, certainty, but lots of big companies, the world's biggest companies from Australia around the world, we're going to put a wind farm there. It's an overwhelming tsunami. You can't possibly do it. So we tried to filter it out and everything else. One of the things that we got the state government in to do is what they call a renewable energy zone readiness assessment. It's pretty sexy, it's very sophisticated, all the different things you need, because to actually, as a precursor to saying we've got a plan to get from A to B, you need a lot of stuff, which a lot of it's quite boring. And so Lee will be talking about some town planning things later. But before we can talk to all of that cool stuff, unless you've got like enough kindergartens and houses and everything else, it's just not going to happen. So it was a bit sad that we introduced a bit of a reality check into how all of that can unfold. So Labor, as a side issue, we're working with another state government in Australia on labour and skills. So there's another part of New South Wales, they're going to transition as well. They've got $7 billion transmission line going up the middle of the state. There's a bunch of different consultants in. The bit that we're doing is labour, market and skills. There's about a 32,000 sort of electrical engineer, electrician shortage. And so on Wednesday, next week, I'm in Sydney to tell the New South Wales government I've got some bad news. It's just not going to be possible. So transition, know where you're going, but you've got to think about all the things that get you there. And then, of course, in the case of this place, but I think it's kind of relevant for probably a lot of places in this room, like say you're in mining and you're transitioning to something else, and say mining's going to close, okay, well then we better do something else. Is the other thing going to be sort of economically valuable? So the science is out, I think, on that question about how much is in for a local economy from renewable energy. And the team did a global sort of search on this one, and I'm not sure we came up with a good answer on, so if we've got a mine there, I'm going to get rid of that mine, I'm going to have 5 wind farms. Are we better off or not? Hasn't been done, but I think, my back of the envelope calculation says no. So another place, so on that map, where's that map? So if you go up like northwest of the red dot, that's where Mount Isa is. And if you're a mining person, you'll know Mount Isa. So Mount Isa is one of the world's biggest mineral areas. It's got all sorts of stuff. It just had its 100th anniversary. A lot smaller than Sudbury, but pretty similar sort of joint. And it's got lots and lots of little mines, but one big one, Glencore's the operator. 4 metals, but copper is the big story there. And last year, quite responsibly, they said, we're going to close the copper mine. Okay, righto, what do you do? So we've been packaged, a bunch of different people in, give them lots of help, but it's just hard. So if there's any demographers in the room, population is just so important in these discussions. So Mount Isa used to have 23,000 people, and then it sort of levelled out about 20,000 people, and now it's got about 18,000 people. But all the big shops and the service providers and everything, they've got metrics. So if you want a McDonald's, I'm not really into McDonald's, but if you want a McDonald's, you've got to have about 17,000 people. So then if you don't have a McDonald's, the kids say, oh, I'm not moving to Mount Isa. So then it's hard to get the engineer and the mum and dad to. So all of those things start to make a big difference. So what are we doing there? We've come up with we tried to figure out, because no one really cared, so we tried to figure out what Mount Isa was worth to other places. So we worked out to the Australian government, federally, it was worth 800 million a year in taxes of all sorts, and to the Queensland government, 200 million a year in taxes of all sorts, because they're facing this existential threat. So when Glencore closes, of the 18,000 people, that's 2,000 direct jobs and 6,000 indirect jobs. It would be a disaster. So we wanted to try and create a picture of why people should care about it. And I think we're getting there. And I think this is vaguely a secret, but a $2 billion structural adjustment program of a whole bunch of things to help them. Like, it'll be a structural adjustment, it'll be completely different sorts of workers, different sorts of housing. And you get into this death cycle. So banks won't lend there anymore. So if you go to the bank and say, I'd like to borrow some money, please, to buy a house, no. So on. I better hurry up, hadn't I? Sorry. Yeah, okay. Sorry, you set the standard. So, oh dear. So a few years ago, I was in Mount Isa, a different thing, chatting to the mayor, and that mayor had received a letter from another mayor of a mining town. And the mayor of the other mining town, Kalgoorlie, said, I don't think anyone listens to us. And so when something goes wrong in a mining town, like, you might get sort of a ripple in the capital city, but it's a big problem in the little place. So we set this thing up. I'm not sure that it's going super well, but it's a thing. I think the idea is good, so that's why I mention it in case it's relevant to countries here. But like a little group of like-minded local governments to collectively talk to people about the relevant issues. Righto, abandoned mines. So there's somewhere between 5 and 100,000 abandoned mines in Australia, depending on a shaft, but they're everywhere. And that map, I didn't do it, but I think it could be better. But those are not deposits, they're holes in the ground. So all of the different governments want to do something with this. And so one of the cool things they say is, well, it was mined 80 years ago and they used old techniques, and now you can use some fancier techniques and make it work. So Heritage Minerals is my favourite client. They're crazy. So they are, let's go back to the red dot. So that red dot, to Mount Morgan, the mine that they're doing is...
Sorry, that wasn't on purpose, but...
Oh, really?
Did you think I was going to grab that?
Yeah, no, I thought... Okay.
They say timing's everything.
Right, yeah, okay. Right. Well, I've got a new microphone now. So, oh, really? Oh, you weren't joking? No. Where was I? They said, well, we'll do that. Thanks for the thought. We'll rehabilitate an abandoned mine. Anyone here rehabilitated an abandoned mine? Like, don't do it. Like, oh, really? Yeah? No. So it was the world's biggest mine for several decades, paid for Australia's effort in World War I. Most of the world's modern tunnelling technology comes from Mount Morgan. It's an unbelievable place, very scarred and everything. And 1890 till about 1980 was the big period, and then they just closed the gate and left all the rubbish. But there's still lots of tailings with all goodies in them. And then they've got this new technology. But if you want to finance a mine like that, so it's private capital, unlisted company, that's the only way you're going to do it. Don't try and do this as a listed company. You're not going to succeed because you've got to be more agile. Is you go to the bank and you say, we're going to do this project, and they say, where does the risk lie? So you've got all this disaster here and you guys are going to get pinned for that. So you've got to have sort of an agreement that insulates you from the risk of all the bad stuff that's gone before. So, hang on. So anyway, that is to say, when you're talking about resilient economies and transition, this is one pathway, but you've really got to know what you're doing, and it's really, really hard. And all the service providers need to get better, and the regulators need to get better. So finance has got to be able to do it. Insurers, you think, oh, this is all, and then you go to get insurance, and they go, what is this? We're not insuring that. So this project's been insured by about 8 big global insurers. It took a year and a half just to get them to sign off on that. Finance insurance, risk limitations. So the secret is, so if there's a pile of mess there, the new people have got to be insulated from that risk or they won't do it. Now, nature positive, I didn't know much about nature positive for a while, a couple of years ago, but a lot of what they're going to be doing when they're rehabilitating this mine is cleaning up past messes. So that's good. There is zero incentive to clean up past messes. So the policymakers in the room, you've got to give people who are putting money up, risk, a reason to do nature positive stuff. And regulation, I'm pretty sure Canada's doesn't cater. So regulation in the environmental space is about stopping bad things, but there's nothing that sort of accommodates good things. Green metal premiums, I haven't seen one, but I'm still looking. All right, we're in trouble. 1 minute, okay. Valuing public benefits, do it. Not easy, get a good team of economists in to help you. Localising benefits, if you're into sort of highly competitive practices, look away now. But what this is systems require you to do is sort of invest locally, local procurement, so forth. So there's an art to that. And ideally you get good people doing good things at not too much of an increment of what you might get from a wider net. Indigenous engagement, so we've spoken a lot about that today, but in particular in that Mount Morgan one, they're focused on cultural heritage. Hard to do, but really nice, they'll get there. We've spoken a lot about equator principles. I was at the first meeting in 2000 at the World Bank on equator principles. Pete Whitbread Abratat's book is about this. So we've just done a quick economic model for this outfit called EnviroMets. They've been given a small amount of money from the Australian government to look into post-mining land use alternatives. So regulation, 60s and 70s, let's be better at the environment. When you finish mining, fill it in and put a tree on top. This is looking at different ways of creating economic activity and possibly with the same or better environmental outcomes, but the rules don't allow it. So if you're a mining company, you've paid your financial insurance, your mine's finished, the law says, and the things you sign up says, fill it up and put a tree on top. But there might be 102 more sensible things to do. Regulation doesn't really permit it. Okay. Supply side constraints, it's really boring, but this entire conversation. So if you're in Perth, Western Australia, and you swing a dead cat around, you will hit 10 world-class mining engineers without meaning, you just hit. But if you swing the same dead cat and try and get good metal process engineers for more value adding, you won't hit anyone. So you've got to go to Lithuania or Poland or Estonia, and Canada's stronger, I think, but this is a big issue for much of the conversation. Oh, how'd that get back there? So, and all these other things. Now, I won't go into slide 10 because I'm in trouble. All right. Okay.
Okay, like Doug Morrison, 40 years in the mining industry, started on a jackleg drill, air leg drill on the 5,000 foot level below surface and 45 degrees centigrade. There you go. So here's our problem. Those are the kind of numbers that we need to solve the energy transition. 5 times more this, 5 times more copper, 5 times more nickel, 5 times more lithium and graphite. Not actually possible by any of the mining companies, so that's a problem. However, we will have innovation on the demand side, which will probably reduce that number from 5 times to 4 times, maybe 3 times. But we at least need double everything. Just say that, double everything really fast. So that's what we have to do, and we have to do it before 2040, 2050, because after 2050, climate change takes off and becomes unstoppable. So we don't have a lot of time to waste. This is no time for the Swedish chefs at the Muppets, okay? Not do. This is like, we've got to make this happen really, really soon. These are the other numbers we need to know. This is the global distribution of greenhouse gases for the entire global economy. The big ones are transportation, infrastructure, manufacturing, and cement. They produce 70% of the world's greenhouse gases. The mining industry, that little black rectangle, produces 2%. So I understand that it's really wonderful to reduce the to do the greening of the mining industry. But if we go from 2% to 1.5% and fail completely to produce the metals and minerals these four big sectors need to electrify their businesses, we fail completely and miserably. So the task of the mining industry is to produce the minerals and metals that the four big guys need to cut their emissions in half. And if that means going from 2% to 4%, that's what we should do, because they're going to reduce by 35%. Net gain. I'm not interested in net zero, because net zero means I am actually producing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere until 2040, net zero 2040. Not good enough. Stop it as soon as you can stop it. That's the target. So I'm not interested in solving the 2% problem. I want to solve the 70% problem with more metals and minerals to make that happen. Here's the problem. There's the projection for copper globally. The blue area is we're at peak copper this year. The global production of copper decreases now for the next 20 years. So how do we electrify the economy when the yellow line says that's the increase in demand for copper, but it's actually declining because we don't have enough copper mines. So how do you do that? Well, you could say, let's find another copper mine. If you wanted to find another copper mine, if you found one today, it will be 20 years before it produces a ton. That is the time lag between finding a deposit and bringing it into production. So we don't have time for that. Fortunately, we have the green blob, which is all the uneconomic deposits that cannot go into production because they're uneconomic. But if you bring in strategic innovation, reduce the cost of production, those deposits immediately become productive and can be brought on stream faster than finding new ones and bringing them on stream. That's what we need to do. That's strategic innovation. It's not just doing the kinds of things that improve your immediate operations. It's strategically important for the global production system. And if we don't, then guess what? Then you get the demand gap. That's the red arrow, which is really, really bad. And yeah, the price of copper goes up. Most mining companies would like the price of copper to go up, but we don't. We collectively do not. Why? Because we are in a competition with fossil fuels. Electric cars are already too expensive for most people to buy. And if the price of copper goes up, so does the price of the grid, so does the price of the copper cars. So you do not compete positively against fossil fuels. We lose again. We need to have more copper, cheaper and faster. And that means innovation of all types as soon as you can make it happen. That's where we are. And if not, we still need new mines by 2037. So you've got to bring new mines on as well for the longer term, because this is not just a short race, this is a marathon. Unfortunately, we're not finding enough copper fast enough. So too bad, but we've got to get better at that. But we've got some time. If we bring on the green blob, we can buy some time to get new mines found and developed. Unfortunately for nickel, it's worse. You see there's no big green blob. And yep, it's just the demand for nickel is getting worse and worse. Recently, if you don't find new deposits, you can actually innovate. But the Chinese did that while we did not. So now they can produce their nickel cheaper than us, and they can command the commodity price that we used to have exclusively. And even then, they still will not produce enough nickel for everybody to do all the stuff we want to do. This is really critical for all of us. These are the things that mining companies have to do as part of the permitting process. I'm not going to spend any time on that, because the reason it's a problematic thing is because the most important thing for the future is not ESG, environmental social governance, because governance is a policy issue for companies and for governments and boards, etc. I have been to dozens and dozens and dozens of communities, and nobody ever complained about the company policies. They complained about water quality, air quality, land quality, contamination, etc., etc. They want solutions for those problems on the ground. They do not care about your ESG problem. So, just in case you've not seen what a mine looks like, if it works out well, that's what it looks like. A great big hole in the ground and a great big pile of tailings right next door. That's if it works out well. If it works out badly, That's what it looks like. That's why nobody wants to live to that, next to that anymore. And communities all around the world are objecting more and more strenuously and positively to stop this from happening. In actual fact, with the technologies that the micro-organization is already promoting through acceleration, we actually can make that happen instead. So you fund the innovation, you accelerate the commercialization of those answers, because if it's not commercialized, nobody's going to buy it and use it as a technology. So that's what you have to do. And we can do that now, but implementation is the problem. And the speed at which we implement things is the problem. We can develop ideas, we can commercialize them, we still need people to actually adopt it and make the change happen. And that's what's slow. And that's not changing in policies, that's not changing the permitting process, it's coming up with real answers to real problems. So here we are, that's the last thing. We're back to this again. Mining is now the most important industry in the world. Because without mining doing better than it's doing now, climate change takes off. That also means that mining communities, big cities, small communities are the most important communities on the planet as well. Because if we cannot get the changes made that will make more mines open faster and old mines become more productive faster, then climate change kills us all. So without massive investments in strategic innovation, there is no green transition, no energy transition, none of it is happening. But if we do make the investments in strategic innovation for mining, not only do we produce the metals and minerals that we need to change those 4 big sectors, we also can turn it into the green spot that you saw, which is productive of oxygen, because it's plants, and it absorbs carbon dioxide. And the more of that we do in tropical places where plants grow fast, the faster we begin to change the atmosphere. Because we're doing both things, changing the industrial picture, but also changing the agrarian picture as well, with forestry, plants, etc., etc., etc. So we can already produce the potable water from those effluents. All of that technology is done. It needs to be implemented as quickly as possible. And that's my 10 minutes of fame. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'll try and get through my presentation relatively quickly so we have some time for discussion. But first I just wanted to say Wayaba, which is the Ngarluma word for hello. The Ngarluma people are the traditional owners of the land that I live on in Karratha. And I just wanted to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today as well, and thank them for the really warm welcome that we got yesterday. The drumming circle and the dancing was fantastic. We're accustomed to welcome to countries in Australia, but haven't seen anything like that before, so that was really exciting to experience. Okay. This is a slide that the Mayor showed you yesterday. It's just a reminder of where we are in Australia. We're about 1,500 kilometres from Perth, and we're traditionally known as an iron ore export town. But we also have some really significant industrial production happening in our region as well, which includes a significant urea plant, which is under production at the moment, a major ammonia plant. We've got Woodside operating LNG production to the tune of about 7 gas trains, producing gas from what comes from the Northwest Shelf. We've also got a fairly significant salt operation at Dampier Salt, which I'm told a fairly significant proportion of comes to North America to help you de-ice your roads, and that is not a significant issue where we come from, so you are welcome to that production. I also wanted just to zoom out a little bit and look more broadly at the Pilbara region. So the Pilbara region is sort of across the middle of Western Australia. It's a very, very significant land area with a very, very tiny population. Our colleagues at the Pilbara Development Commission produce these investment snapshots once a year. This is actually out of date by about 12 months. I think our Mayor spoke yesterday to the fact that the 10-year investment pipeline has actually gone up to $250 billion from $175 billion in the last 12 months. But I really wanted to draw your attention to how teeny tiny our population bases are across those 4 local government areas. City of Karratha is the blue one there. We're the smallest land area, largest population, but we've still only got 25,000 people across our entirety of our municipal area. So we're not facing mine closures like some regions are. We're facing the opposite issue, which is we're transitioning into green energy and broader economic diversification from just base minerals across to critical minerals. And that's on top of everything else that we already do. And we're doing that with our teeny tiny population base. So we're seeing a really significant shift across to green energy. That's principally solar and wind. The wind typically has to be located further back from the coast because we're in a cyclone belt and there's obvious wind issues that we need to deal with in terms of putting those turbines up. But we are blessed with an awful lot of sun where I come from, well in excess of 200 days a year of 10 plus hours of sun. So the potential for solar is really significant. And there's some really significant exploration projects going on at the moment, identifying really big gold operations and lithium just outside the town of Roebourne. There's a deposit that's just been identified that looks like it'll be amongst the largest in Australia. They're a few years away from FID, but that'll have a massive impact on our region. Challenges. Sounds like we've all got the same challenges. It's about capacity. And that's largely to do with remoteness. Thank you. That's largely to do with remoteness and not having a normalised housing market. We keep banging the drum with our state and federal partners in government to remind them that they actually need to invest in our community, and that investment may be at a loss in terms of housing production. In fact, it will be at a loss because it is so expensive to construct in our region. But if they don't do that, they will not see the kind of economic gains that they could by increasing our population base so that we can keep up with with all of the innovation that's happening in our region. We have the same problems with not having early and meaningful engagement. That's definitely the case with our Indigenous communities and is also an issue with local government. We tend to be engaged with after the decision to issue an approval for a major industrial project has already happened. As a local government, we have really significant constraints on the kinds of revenue that we can raise. Karratha is fortunate in that we're a fairly wealthy local government. We've made some significant investment decisions over the last 20 years that have meant that we don't just rely on our property rates base, but we're not able to raise other taxes, and that has a really limiting impact on what we can achieve. And I've already spoken to the fact that we're really struggling to get state and federal government to appreciate that they're going to need to invest in our regional communities if they want to see that growth. So some of the things that we're doing as a local government, we're having to rebrand and really rethink about how we do community engagement. So what we make it banner there is our new sort of community engagement logo. We've had some really great projects, including an annual community survey of the last 10 years, which asks the same questions every year. That's the sort of bottom right, I think, of your screen with the graph. We try and measure livability within our community with a view to finding where the gaps in expectation and performance are so that we can tailor the programs that we offer to try and make our community more livable. Happy to share that community survey with anybody who's got an interest if they would like to do it at their local government levels. And we're trying to promote brand recognition in our region as well. There's an awful lot of people in Western Australia, let alone Australia, that don't know where Karratha is. I'd really encourage you, if you've got time, go onto YouTube at some point, plug in Karratha is Calling. There's a really beautiful 90-second video that gives a great snapshot to our region. Really amazing landscapes, nothing like Sudbury. I don't think we've got 14 million trees in the entirety of our local government area, but really beautiful landscapes nonetheless. And I think I spoke earlier to this idea of we're trying to convince our state and federal government partners that if they don't invest in us, they're effectively strangling the goose that lays the golden egg. Just to finish off, I wanted to throw up a couple of projects that may be of interest, particularly given that I know there's a big First Nations contingent here. These are really interesting projects where our Indigenous communities are getting in at the ground level. Traditionally, when our mines where iron ore in particular was discovered in the late 60s and the early 70s, they really weren't part of the process and haven't benefited in the way that they ideally could have. So there's a couple of projects going on there. Yinjabandi Energy in particular, they benefit from having really great leadership from a gentleman named Michael Woodley. They're driving a project that is looking at, it's a partnership with ASIN, and it is looking at it's a long-term project, 20 to 25 years, but producing up to 3 gigawatts of power production, which is enormous, but is going to be needed as we transition across to green hydrogen and green ammonia production. And the beauty of that is that they will own that asset and they will be able to become the service provider into those green energy industries. We've also got a World Heritage nomination in the midst at the moment for our Murujuga cultural landscape. The Burrup Peninsula, if you've never been to Karratha, is a really magical environment. There are 60,000 years of continuous connection to the land for our local Indigenous people. Murujuga Aboriginal Corporation represent 5 different language groups. And there's estimated to be up to 1 million petroglyphs across the Burrup region. Really beautiful, significant location. So if that gets up, I think that that'll be a really significant tourism drawcard. It's going to be a really interesting transition though, because to get out to that location, you have to drive past a urea, an ammonia, a liquid natural gas, and an iron ore loading facility. So really stark contrast between those things. They've also got a really fantastic strategic agreement making project underway at the moment, which they received $2 million of federal funding towards. And it's to help them deal with the fact that since they signed their original agreement with the industrial producers on the Burrup about 25 years ago, the landscape has really changed significantly. So the feds are supporting them to be able to renegotiate with their industrial partners and get it more benefit. And the last one is in its infancy, but it's a partnership between Legacy and Nalama, and it is a desalination project which is intended to provide water towards our green hydrogen, which is a massive water user. And again, is a really lovely project because it'll give ownership to the local Nalama people. So I thought they might be of interest if you want to have a look at those. And that's it for me.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to join this panel today, and I feel really privileged to find some counterparts, and I want to connect later too. I want to thank OECD for convening us all and just feeling very inspired by all the remarks today. I'm Grace Blanchard, and I work on the Building Resilient Economies and Coal Communities initiative at the National Association of Counties. So my goal today is to share with you what local government entities in the United States are doing and how they are navigating both economic and energy transitions. So just for a little bit of context, NACO is the only association of county governments in the U.S., and so we serve the 3,069 counties across the states, and we advocate for federal policy or for county priorities and federal policy making and share best practices across county leaders. But at NACO, I am charged with leading our Building Resilient Economies and Coal Communities initiative. And so this is a community of practice model designed to connect coal-impacted counties, and it was funded by the U.S. Economic Development Administration. The purpose is to empower local leaders and provide communities with the strategic tools to revitalize their community. And so my goal is to highlight some of those tools and take you to some of these communities today. Just wanted to put up this map that shows 330 counties have at least one coal-fired power plant in them, and 150 more have coal production in them. So this is along this theme of we recognize that this is a shared challenge. Change and transition is hard, and we have several communities across the states that are facing this, but are in very different regions. So we need to learn from and connect with each other, whether you're in Appalachia or the Rocky Mountain West, and now learning that with other countries too. We need to share these best practices and learn from each other. So I wanted to highlight 3 of the 5 strategies that BREC communities are utilizing to diversify their economy and therefore respond to in the short term, recover from in the long term, and then also prepare for economic shocks in the future. And like I said, I'm going to then take you to 3 communities that are putting these strategies into action. So the first is strategic planning. This is how communities are intentionally layering their strategies and building and sustaining project momentum. So through BREC, we also have a technical assistance program, Paul, that enables communities to apply to receive coaching support and then create a locally driven economic diversification strategy. So let's look at Coconino, Arizona, who is embracing this wholeheartedly. Coconino partnered with their 2 neighboring counties, Navajo and Apache counties. And this was no easy feat because these are huge counties in terms of land mass, and it was a huge deal for them to actually come together and work. So for 1 year, they came together, they met every month, worked with a community coach, created task teams, engaged key partners like the Navajo Nation, like their local utility, like a key state philanthropy, and they established their priorities. And I want to highlight something that was really unique that these leaders did. They informally adopted a get on base strategy. And because we're from the States, we love a baseball analogy. They decided to no longer buffalo hunt and find that one replacement for the coal industry. So when a major employer leaves, I feel like we all can feel that temptation of you want to replace that industry with an equivalent. But because they established this shared vision and they established this get on base strategy, which really resonated with them as a community, they decided they wanted to move each of their projects a step forward. So whether it's completing a feasibility study or securing funding or just leveraging a new partnership, they are all moving towards this shared vision, and having this locally driven strategy in place helped them. The next one I want to highlight or call out is our industry diversification. So this is pursuing new industries and transitioning an economy into a next new phase. Our communities are constantly saying all our eggs were in one basket. And how do we prepare our economy to have eggs in multiple baskets? What does that look like? So I want to take us to Northwest Colorado and Routt County. They are facing the pending closure of 2 coal-fired power plants in 2025. This is extremely scary for this community. It's their tax base, it's their jobs, it's their culture. And they are doing everything they can right now to transition or resist the tendency to shift from one mono economy to another mono economy. And so they've identified several avenues to diversify. One is to grow value-added agriculture and repurpose some of their industrial sites for meat processing and storage. So there used to be a vibrant farming culture in this region, but it's phased out due to the coal industry. So they want to revitalize that and help secure supply chains and really create this self-sufficiency around food in this region. They're also looking at feasibility studies to assess hydrogen technology, small nuclear reactors that would go in the place of their existing power plants. And then, of course, this is Colorado, so they have a lot of natural assets, and they are looking to build an outdoor recreation economy, and are particularly the county itself is investing in a whitewater rafting park. The final strategy that I just wanted to uplift is community revitalization. And I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here because I think we've all communicated that community development is economic development. And we really have to keep the heart of a community and the culture in mind when we're thinking about economic resilience and the future of our economies. So that's why I want to take us to Nicholas County, West Virginia. This is a really rural county in central West Virginia, just a little under 20,000 population. And they have been impacted not just by the downturn in the coal industry, but before that, the downturn in the timber industry. It's hard there. So they have really focused on revitalizing their community, and they've identified downtown rehabilitation. So looking at old banks and general stores and repurposing these for apartments, as well as co-working space. They've looked at outdoor recreation and not just a trail system in the community, but creating a regional trail system. So not only Nicholas County benefits, but the whole region is attracting new visitors. And they're finding now that those visitors are now becoming new residents and contributing to the communities. And they're also looking to embrace local arts and culture. There is a unique onion in Nicholas County that they like to call a ramp. And they have created a whole festival around ramps. And it's sparked a whole new culinary culture in Richwood that is really exciting for them. And it is attracting new visitors. It's incubating small businesses and restaurants. And really, this is an opportunity where they are embracing their true selves and their community character. And it's helping their economy. So I just wanted to close today by saying Breck's goal and the reason why we were created was to connect local leaders from mining regions and from coal communities so that they could share these best practices, so that it could feel like we're not alone in this together, that we are rowing in the same direction and that we can learn from other communities. So I'm just really want to say that I'm eager to thank you all for the opportunity to learn from you. And then I hope that we can connect and share some of your stories with our network, because I know that that will help our coal communities as well. So thank you.
What incredible expertise, and you from so many different parts of the world. So thank you so much, everyone. We don't have a lot of time, of course. I'm going to ask a big encompassing question, which is through all of your professional life and all of the work you do on transitioning regions. We know transitions are hard, but what are you really inspired by right now, and what do you see as some fantastic, promising practices that you'd like to share with us? And so, yeah, you just grab
Okay,
the mic.
this will work. Yeah. So we work exclusively with small to medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, in the mining sector, and they've already identified the niches that they want to exploit. The SME community in every sector of the economy is the most creative and most dynamic sector, and that is the driver of change in any business, in any sector of the economy. So wherever you are and whatever you're doing, developing an SME community and making it stronger and more vibrant is the best route to success.
Great, perfect, thank you. Nuggets of inspiration from our wonderful panel.
We're starting to see some innovation, really good innovation hubs happening in Perth, in Metro Western Australia, and we're really struggling to get that to take hold in an area like ours, where the attitude seems to be, well, why would they do that here? They can just go to Perth to do it. Like, you're missing the point. We have really great ideas in this region. We have incredible exposure to industry that people in Perth do not get daily exposure to. And so I think there's a lot to be learned from those really good innovation hubs about how we can support SMEs and really make use of the local assets that we've got and the local opportunities.
Fantastic.
I think we see that when a community builds on their strengths, obviously that is a great direction. I know at dinner last night, communities that are engaging their youth and really bringing them into the innovation and the change and the transition processes, that is very inspiring to the localities and is kind of giving them that new economy feel that I know that kind of Paul had mentioned too.
My inspiration level's gone up a bit being here for the last couple of days, so that's good. The EU money, like, that's going to shift the dial. So $1 trillion into the renewable energy and 700 million into raw materials will make a difference. But I'm not sure that the EU's too well represented here, the EU bits of the OECD. And so I wonder why that is. I mean, that money could have bought a few plane tickets, but there's a huge amount of opportunity in, like, Cyprus. There's this gigantic 5,000-year-old mine called Apliki, and you can just turn it back on and there'll be more copper. But EU regulations in relation to waste, because all the old stuff's called waste. So you've got to unwind that regulation, that's a problem. And then a big old one in Romania called Razia Montana. So there's a few things they could do. So I thought there might be some more of that crew here. I was really interested to learn about this $5 billion Indigenous loan guarantee scheme that's here. I thought that sounded pretty clever. I reckon it's going to be very hard to do, but it sounds good. But getting $5 billion out the door is hard. So I hope the federal government, I presume, is behind that, puts lots and lots of people in. Like, think how many people you need and then times it by 10, and then that will give you a chance of getting that money out the door. And then the other inspiration was that coalition, whatever, the First Nations Major Project Coalition. I haven't heard of anything like that before. I thought that sounded potent.
Great, thank you. Those are great examples. Final word.
Okay, last one. Just at a very personal level, and you asked me what has inspired me over the, if I take the progress that we've made in Europe in dealing with coal communities, and if I consider where we were 6 years ago and where we are today, that's probably been the most inspiring thing, mostly because there is now a collective identity of coal regions, and also then at a local level, instead of people feeling isolated, they're working together. And the whole, as was mentioned earlier, about working collectively and strategically at a local level is something which we didn't see and which we do see now. And I think that's really an important aspect of what's going on. My big fear now is that that continues to be supported at a policy level. And that's the most important thing now, is that that can continue and that momentum is not lost.
Great. Yes, Doug.
One last thing. There's one word that we have to extinguish from our vocabulary, and that is waste. What mining companies call waste is not waste, even if it's 99 or 98 or 97% of the total material produced. It is not waste. It is a byproduct. And if you think about it hard enough and long enough, there are businesses that can be developed by using that byproduct to create other businesses. Unfortunately, the mining companies have no interest in doing that. That's irrelevant. It's a byproduct. Find the use for that material and generate businesses in every community where there are mines, and you'll be far, far more resilient, because the mining companies don't make your communities resilient. You have to do that for yourselves. And that's the answer, is using the products that they've produced and leave as waste. There is no waste. It's a byproduct.
I'd love to learn more about that. Thank you. Round of applause to our fantastic panelists. Thank you.